Hello guys, welcome back. So today I'm just going to do some simple patriotic DIYs. And I am going to be using these little printouts that I took out of this book. I just pulled out the page and I'm going to cut them up and use them on these crafts. So I'm going to start out with the sifter that is actually missing the screen on the inside. I'm just going to give it 2-3 coats of this white paint from Waverly Chalk Paint in the color Plaster. And after giving it some time to dry, I'm going to go in with this sanding block and just give it a quick distress. I did let it dry for a little too long and it was a bit hard to distress it. So I did go in with a baby wipe and just activated the paint a little bit and it distressed just fine after that. Then I'm going to go ahead and use this little label here. I'm going to go ahead and cut it out and I'm going to decoupage it onto my sifter. And before I do that, I just go ahead and went in with some Distress Oxide from Hobby Lobby and go along all the edges just to give it a more aged look. So I'm going to go ahead and add a thin layer of Mod Podge and then I'm going to add my label right over that. So I'm going to go ahead and smooth out any bubbles or wrinkles, which this paper is a little on the thick side, so I didn't get much of that. And any of the excess Mod Podge along the edges, I just cleaned up with a baby wipe. Then again, just to give it a more grungy look, I'm going to go in with the Distress Oxide, add it to the edges of my paper and along the edges of my sifter. And that is it for this one. Stay tuned for the end for the end results. Next up, I had a little bag of these little vintage thread spools. I'm just going to create a little photo holder using one of them. So I did take this off of a little vintage photo holder. I just cut it off of that and I'm just going to cut it down and I'm going to stick it right in the center of my thread spool. And just to give it a little bit more stability, I'm going to go ahead and put some foam right down in the center of my spool. And I went and cut out another little print from that page. I'm going to go ahead and age the edges and stick it into my little photo holder. And I do end up putting some glue down into the floral foam and then adding some moss to the top just to cover the foam. Then I went ahead and it was still a little bit unstable. So I'm going to get this little wooden, I think it's like a wheel or something. I put some glue and I'm going to set my spool right on top of that and that did the trick. And that is basically it for this one. I think it's super simple and easy to do. Let me know what you guys think. Next up is this very old book. It's basically falling apart. The binding is almost off. I'm just going to take off the rest and then just add some glue. Then using the long picture here, I'm going to go ahead and cut it out and I want to decoupage it to the side of the book. So right here, I'm just adding a coat of Mod Podge just to try and keep this together and so it doesn't fall apart any further. Then once that coat dry here, I'm just going to add a Mod Podge little by little and slowly add my picture to get it decoupaged to the side of the book. So right here's where I realized that I should have cut my print to size. It was folding over. I wanted to keep it that way, but I was adding Mod Podge and it just wasn't sticking. This paper out of this book was a little on the thick side, so I am assuming that is why. So as soon as I let all that glue dry that I put on there, I grabbed my sanding block and I'm just going to sand off that edge that was hanging over. And as I always do, I'm going to grab my Distress Oxide and just go along all the edges, and I felt like that just made it match more with the book. The book is already falling apart and grungy looking, so it just went with it. And just to secure it a bit further, I'm going to grab some jute and just wrap it around my book. Then just using pieces of these dry floral stems, I'm going to go ahead and cut some pieces off and I'm going to add it to my jute just for an extra embellishment. So since this is going to my booth, I'm not going to put any glue underneath my jute there, just in case somebody wants to remove it, they can go ahead and do so. And that is basically it for this one. I really love the primitive look of this one. Next up is going to be this little spindle box that I made a couple months ago. It's actually been a very long time. I've just had it laying around. I'm going to go ahead and give it a more patriotic look. So I do want to decoupage this napkin on the front and the back. I'm going to start by adding a very generous coat of Mod Podge. This wood is very dry, so it soaks in the Mod Podge very quickly, so I put a very generous amount on my wood. I'm going to go ahead and lay my napkin down and then just give it a couple pats, and then I will put a glove on just to add a barrier between my hands and the glove, just to try and smooth out some of the wrinkles and the bubbling. And once I gave that time to dry, I'm going to go along the edges with my sanding block and remove all the excess napkin. Then I will go ahead and age my edges with some Distress Oxide. And using my favorite crackle stamp from the IOD, I believe it's Textures, I'm going to go ahead and stamp right over the napkin. Then I will seal it up with another coat of Mod Podge, and that is it for this one. Next up is going to be this can straight out of my kitchen. I just washed it up, gave it a good cleaning, and I'm going to go over it with 2 coats of Waverly chalk paint in the color Plaster. And using the leftover napkin from the previous DIY I did in my previous video, I'm going to use the rest of it and decoupage it onto my can here. So starting off with a thin layer of Mod Podge, then I will place my napkin right over that and just give it a couple taps and try and get it into the little ridges of my can, just to make sure I don't have any lifted areas. And here I'm just getting some more Mod Podge right underneath the corners, just so it doesn't lift. And then again, using my sanding block, just gonna sand off all the excess napkin along all the edges. And I did go ahead and decoupage the same napkin on the back, so if they do use it on a table or something, it's on both sides. And to create my little succulent arrangement, I'm going to start off by adding some floral foam into my can. And I did make sure to add glue underneath the foam as well. And to cover the top foam, I'm going to add some of this green moss. So I did have some extra succulents that were left from a couple months ago. I'm just going to go ahead and create a little succulent arrangement. So I decided to make this one also a little picture holder. So I put another one of them little picks into the center of my arrangement to hold some of those vintage prints that I pulled out of that book. And that is basically it for today's video. I hope you guys enjoyed and are inspired to make some primitive, patriotic home decor. If you like what you see, please subscribe and follow for more, and we'll see you in the next one. Bye-bye.